Welcome to part 2 of lesson 3 on miracles. And we're starting now to take a look at the miracles found in the book of Exodus. And let's start with the burning bush. Why not? God calls Moses into service from a burning bush, but not consumed by fire. The scripture for that is verses 1 through 4 from chapter 3. And let me share it with you, at least two of the key verses 3 and 4. The Lord said, I'll give you all 4. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had come over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses! And Moses said, Here I am. Now, is that a miracle? Yeah, I'd say that's a Big 10-4 in the miracle department. Now, are there explanations from science? Yeah, I've got a few of those too. Mind you, God doesn't enter in, but science has got some explanations. Some of them are pretty far-fetched. Scientists theorize, it's not fact, just a theory, it's possible Moses witnessed an earthquake light, a bizarre phenomena after or before an earthquake occurs. The light looks like a luminous burning flame. Scientist Dag Christian Dyseth, who was asked to investigate spontaneously igniting bushes in the Sahara in 2003, offered a theory which she might believe goes a long way to explaining what happened to Moses. Her research team discovered that a burning layer of turf under the soil caused the smoke and the heat that set the bushes on fire. In fact, the heat in some of the holes measured a pretty remarkable 1,292 degrees Fahrenheit. One more. Scientist Colin Humphrey argues in his book, The Miracles of Exodus, that the bush continued to burn because of natural gas or volcanic vent underneath. They really don't want to address the voice of God speaking to Moses, other than they kind of indicate that, well, there was an hallucinogenic drug out there that you can get from certain bushes and trees that was fairly commonly used back then among those people. You know, like magic mushrooms. Yeah, okay. I suppose it's an explanation. Personally, as a Christian, I like the idea of God speaking. And we do have other references in Scripture. For example, the baptism of Jesus, God spoke. The transfiguration of Jesus with Peter and James and John as witnesses. And then let's not forget that we've got Saul on the road to Damascus where Jesus appears and speaks to him as well. So let's be honest. There are other examples. I like God as opposed to magic mushrooms or any equivalent. The burning bush is a miracle. And then let's look at the signs for Pharaoh. You've got a number of interesting ones. You've got the rod turned into a serpent. The staff of Moses is turned into a serpent from Exodus chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Moses' staff is thrown to the ground, it turns into a serpent. Apparently the court magicians of Pharaoh, they had staffs that could do the same thing, so it's, in some people's eyes, a magic trick. And then the staff returns. Well, Cecil B. DeMille in the Ten Commandments apparently wasn't satisfied with that, wanted some really good miracle. And so he has the staff of Moses as it's turned into a serpent, devouring the two staffs turned into serpents of the magicians of the court, and consumes them before it returns to being a staff. Thank you, Cecil. I don't feel it's necessary. Now, we've got two other miracles that kind of fall in line with that. You've got the leper's hand. Moses is directed to put his hand under his cloak and pull it out. It's leprous. He then is instructed, put it back, and then pull it out, and it's clean again. From Exodus chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. And then you have one more rod turned into a serpent. This time it's Aaron's rod. From Exodus chapter 7, verses 8 through 10. Now, what's the purpose? Well, a lot of it has to do with much the same reason the plagues. In other words, Moses is coming to Pharaoh for the purpose of having his people freed. Pharaoh needs to understand whose authority is authority. So, the rod turned to serpent, the leper's hand conveys that. When he still isn't willing to let God's people go, we have the plagues. And you know them as well as I. You've got the blood. All the water in the land turned to blood. Let me just share a portion of it. That in chapter 7, verses 17 through 21, the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone." That's an important verse. Now, there are scientists who explain most of the plagues. For example, the blood for the water is referenced as the red tide, algae building up, which naturally will kill the fish and cause the frogs to get out of the water. What they didn't remember or didn't find because they never read Scripture is the line that goes, even in vessels of wood and stone. In other words, the water might not be in the Nile or one of its tributaries or in a pond or lake that's tied into it. It could be in a pot, a vessel, and it still turns to blood. That, my friends, is what we call a miracle. Now, next comes frogs. Well, all the frogs come out of the water because they can't breathe, and we're talking a whole mess of frogs everywhere. On the streets, in the fields, in the houses, wherever you look, there are frogs. Well, he covers the land with them, and later they are killed. And they do what dead bodies often do. They stink. You look for Exodus chapter 8, verses 2 through 14. So we go from the flood in chapter 7 to the frogs in chapter 8. We continue on with the gnats, the third plague. Gnats, lice, and mosquitoes. Your choice. In chapter 8, verses 16 through 19. Which then makes way for plague number 4, flies, which cover the ground and fill the houses in chapter 8, verses 20 through 24. And that is followed by disease, or plague number 5, the disease of the livestock. We're talking all the livestock. Not just the cows, but everything. From Exodus chapter 9, verses 1 through 7, let me read verse 5. The Lord set a time and said, "Tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land." And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. And when we're talking all, we're talking everything. Cattle, sheep, goats, you name it, they died. All that. Frogs die, what comes naturally. Lice, gnats, mosquitoes. When they go away, what's left now flies next up the rung. What's that going to cause? Probably disease among the livestock. Another miracle, especially when you add to the fact that the Israelite animals were spared. Then, boils. They strike all the animals and the people. Of course, you have mosquitoes, gnats, flies festering on people. Chances are you're going to have boils. But that's about as far as science is willing to go. What comes next is the hail. And they've even got an explanation for that. It has to do with the volcano that supposedly erupted about that time. And it's quite possible. We won't deny that. Is it a miracle? Yeah. Especially when you think, okay, God made that happen at that moment. A miracle. Then you've got locusts. Well, locusts sometimes plague our world today. It's not new. They did back then too. And the darkness, that also could be attributable to the volcanic eruption with ash in the clouds above making things dark so people could not see. The one that nobody really wants to tackle is the death of the firstborn of Egypt, the firstborn people, whether rich or poor, whether slave or free, the death of the firstborn of all the animals. Only one spared are the Jewish people. And they're spared because of the blood on the doorposts and lintel of the houses where they stayed, as they celebrated the first Passover. To see the death of the firstborn, you need to look to Exodus chapter 11, verses 4 through 8. A miracle. And a miracle that has repercussions for our own time. Now, that said, when we get together next week, we'll finish up the miracles in the book of Exodus and move on to the next. And believe it or not, we've got miracles there too. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it causes you to want to take a little time in Scripture reading about these miracles and seeing them in their complete text. Join us again next week as we continue our study in miracles in Lesson 4. Till then, God bless. Stay well. Bye now.